Hello 8th grade artists. So this is going to be your first of the coloring videos for your candy enlargement project. So as you can see, I have my example image done. I've done all of my outlining. I've erased all of my pencil lines. Everything is ready to go ahead and start adding color. And as usual, I have my reference image in front of me so that I know sort of where each color goes, how the colors shift from one to the next, so on and so forth. And like we have talked about in the past, the first thing you're going to do is start with the areas that are furthest back. So I would be starting with sort of this background area, which is a rather large space on this particular example, but it is pretty much just green. So what I'm going to do is I've got my green colored pencil. I'm going to zoom in to this little corner here so you can see these parts. But what I'm going to do is go ahead and just start coloring. Sort of all in one direction, not pressing down very hard. And just getting a nice light shade of green on there. Notice that I'm going all the way across that shape so that I'm not having any pencil lines showing. And then I'm going to go back over it again, slightly darker, so that I can see the color a little bit more. And it gets a little bit more accurate to what is on my reference image. Then I would go ahead and move to the next space. So now this space is a little bit longer, so I'm not going to be going all the way across. So what I'm doing is kind of working my way down that space. Still coloring all in one direction and making sure that I'm not pressing down too hard, because the harder I press down, the more likely it is that those pencil lines are going to show and they're going to interrupt my piece. So a big part of this, especially in the background area, is going to be getting your color as smooth as you possibly can. So now what I'm doing is just turning the page, and I'm going to go over those two spaces in the other direction now. So what this technique does, this kind of turning the page and going in multiple directions, as long as you build each layer up nice and neatly and slowly, this technique will actually help you fill in some of those little gaps in between your pencil lines so that you don't have those gaps there. Especially on the edge of the paper, kind of like how I am here, where I'm in that corner, is going to be very important because it allows you to go along each edge and get a nice solid color without the worry of going off the page and having that line sort of ruin the color that you have there. So now those two spaces might be considered pretty much done at this point. It may not be the exact shade of green, and if I wanted to, I could go back over that with the darker green to get it more to that exact. So I am going to show you what that would look like. So I've got my darker green. I'm still holding it pretty far back. You'll notice that whenever I color, I do, especially at the beginning, hold my pencil pretty far back. And what that does is allow me to actually apply a bit more even pressure throughout. And now I'm just going to do the same technique. I'm not pressing down very hard because I don't want to make this much darker, just a little bit. So that green is not much different from this green, but it's definitely more accurate in terms of the warhead box. So I'm going to do the same thing on this shape. Once again, being very careful to make sure that I'm not having extra pencil lines that I don't need, that are going to cause my image to not look quite as nice. I'm going to turn the page a little bit here. And go back in the opposite direction to kind of get that corner. So the trick to coloring nice and smoothly like that, in that particular way, is to move quickly back and forth, up and down, but then slowly across. So that this way I'm moving really fast, but then this way I'm moving pretty slow, so that I can keep it nice and even and consistent. So then that green would be a little bit more accurate to the green that is on the box. So then I know that the rest of my background space, I would be going ahead and planning to use that green. So I'm just going to start once again nice and light, especially in this larger area. Going from outline to outline as often as I can, but knowing that there's going to be times where I can't, because it is quite a large space. And you'll see that I kind of fade it back into the white of the paper, so that then when I turn my page and I'm shading or coloring in another direction, I can do sort of the same thing. So that it kind of fades back into the white of the paper each time I do a separate sort of gradation almost. And what that's going to do is it will make the coloring take a little bit longer, but it will also make it look much nicer because you won't have those separations where the pencil lines interrupt. So it does take a little extra time, especially if you use two colors like how I am on this example, but it is well worth it because as you can see, I'm ending up with very few or no extraneous pencil marks or separations or sort of jagged edges. Everything is pretty much as smooth as I can make it, which is exactly what we want to go for here. And then this part is white, so I'm not going to put anything there, but I am going to finish out the rest of this sort of background space before I move on to any other background areas. So now I'm kind of doing a bit of a darker green, or not darker green, but pressing down harder with this green, so that more of the color goes onto that page. Now that I've done kind of one layer on this whole section. Now another thing that will definitely help you if you feel like you are struggling with your pencil marks and they're showing up a little bit too much is if you color in circles. So this sort of circular coloring technique does take a little extra time because you have to keep the circles really close together. But because you are coloring in a circle, you're not going to end up with pencil marks that go every which way. But you do need to make sure that you go over and over and over again and keep those circles pretty close together so that you don't end up with circular pencil marks that you don't want. And then you can go back into a horizontal or a vertical if you need to, kind of like how I am now, from that circular technique. Now, once again, I do know that the background will take a little time, and it will get kind of boring and old and frustrating. But you do want to take your time on the background because it is one of the parts that people will see the most because there is simply so much of it. So you do want to make sure that you make it as smooth as you can. Build up the darkness of your color in layers. So if you have a particularly dark green, do not press down super hard all at once. Build it up kind of like how I am, layer after layer. And then those lighter layers will work together to create the darker layer that you are going for. And it will look a lot nicer. So now what I'm going to do is go ahead and go in with my darker green and do basically the same thing that I did previously. Not pressing down very hard, just pressing down enough to make it slightly darker. And once again, I'm going to let it kind of fade into the white there, or not the white anymore because it's green. So remember, holding your pencil further back will definitely help with this step because it just allows you to apply more even pressure and make sure that as much of the colorful tip of the pencil is on the paper as possible. When we get into some more of the detail coloring, you're probably going to put your fingers closer to the tip of the pencil, and that's fine. But on these larger spaces, you will benefit from holding the pencil a little bit further back, even though it does feel weird. Now, as I am working on this particular sort of second or third layer of my darker green, if I feel like I've gotten an area where there's not enough of that limey green showing through, I can always just go back over that section with the lime green, once again, still nice and smooth, and just kind of bring that lime green back into the picture more. So it's definitely going to be a little bit of back and forth, a little bit of a push-pull, as you work to get the exact color and value that you are looking for. And remember, value is just the relative lightness or darkness of a color. So you see that I'm kind of going back and forth as I go, just to keep things as smooth as I possibly can as I am working to finish up this shape, or this space, I should say, before I move to the next. So once again, just kind of using that circular motion here to keep the color as smooth as I can as I go from one to the next. Prevent any excess lines or marks or anything. And now I'm just going back over sections of where I had previously colored with the colors and just double checking things. So now I would be ready to go ahead and move into the rest of this background area using basically the exact same technique that I've just shown you on this section down here, so that eventually that whole background would be this color. I would brighten it up to where it's more like this. You can see that this isn't quite there yet, but it will eventually get there as I continue to build up those layers. Remember that I can go back in and use my lime green again, pressing down harder with that as I need to. And I can just go back and forth between the two greens until I feel like it's even enough. And then I would be ready to move into the next part of my candy enlargement, because remember, we are going to work from the back to the front. So this background area would be what I do first, and then this sort of white cloudy area, and then his face, and then these words. But I could also go ahead and do the two at pretty much any time after I finish the green that goes all the way around it.